Welcome to this week's Shir, Parshat Behar-Bechukotai. We're going to talk about Bechukotai today. That's the parsha that we're going to address, but I'm going to start from a slightly different angle. We will be looking at a Nesivos Sholom, but before we do that, I want to learn a Gemara in Chagiga. And this Gemara in Chagiga, by the way, is not the only place where it appears. This particular passage appears in a number of different places. And we're going to be quoting the Gemara in Chagiga, which I would say is the primary location, but it's also in the Shammai, it's also in Parshat Rabbi Eliezer, it's also in Medrash Rabbah. We're then going to quote a small piece from Medrash Rabbah. And the reason why I'm focusing on this today is because we're going to see the Nesivos Sholom is very taken by this particular Gemara because the piece of Medrash Rabbah uses a pasuk from Parshat Bechukotai in taking the matter further. Sounds a bit intriguing, I know. Let's go into the Gemara and you'll see what I'm talking about. By the way, this is quite a well-known Gemara. It's not a Gemara you've never heard before, I hope. But if it's the first time you're hearing it, you'll hear it's really important. Tanu Rabbanon. We learned in a Braisa. You know that the Gemara records many of the aspects of that which the Tanoim taught, which isn't recorded in the Mishnah. Here's one example. Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis, the Tanoim learned, this is a Braisa, and we have here a machloikus, a dispute, a debate between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, the two competing schools of rabbinic learning that existed during the very late part of the Second Temple period. Before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the two primary schools of learning were Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. I've spoken about it before in my Pirkei Avos shir, that you had Hillel, who was this incredible, powerful, charismatic force in the Jewish world, and he had a Talmud called Shammai, and when Hillel died, it wasn't one of his children or grandchildren who took over as head of the Sanhedrin. Shammai took over, and he had by that time developed his own, style of learning. And there was a bit of a pushback from Hillel's Talmidim, including from his own family. And eventually, when Shammai died, Hillel's family took over. And you had these two competing elements within the Jewish world, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. So you have here, and in many places throughout the Talmud and the Medrash, you have a machloikus between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. Beis Shammai oimrim. Here's Beis Shammai's opinion. Shamayim nivru'u techila. The heavens, Shamayim, we usually translate it into English as heaven, can mean sky, but here it means that which was created in the first day of creation. Shamayim nivru'u techila was created first. That means if you're looking for the chronology, Shamayim came first, v'achar kach nivreis ha'aretz, and after that, land or the earth was created. So you've got here this, I guess you have to think of it in these conceptual terms, that there's two entities, there's a Shamayim entity and there's an Aretz entity. Which one was created first? Says Beis Shammai, we know for sure it must have been Shamayim. Shenemar, Bereshit bara Elokim, at the beginning God created. What's the order in the pasuk? You know it, you'll say it together with me. Shamayim, Eis HaShamayim, ve'Eis HaAretz. He created Shamayim, and then he created Ha'aretz. So it sounds like from the pasuk, if you're looking for chronology, the chronology is right there. Shamayim came first, and then Ha'aretz came. Beis Hillel oimrim, but Beis Hillel disagrees. Beis Hillel have the opposing view in this debate, and they say as follows: Eretz nivreis techila. Don't be confused. Don't be distracted by the chronology of the pasuk. In fact, Eretz was created first. V'achar kach Shamayim, and only afterwards Shamayim. Shenemar, and he brings a pasuk. There is one obscure pasuk, and the pasuk. It's one of the only places where you see that the chronology changes. It's also in Bereshis. It's in Perek Beis pasuk Daled in Bereshis. The pasuk says, "B'yoim asayis Hashem Elokim Eretz v'Shamayim." On the day that God created Eretz v'Shamayim, then we can see from that the word Eretz comes first, the chronology has been reversed, and therefore it must be that Eretz was created first and Shammai was created second. Now, I'm not going to go into, there's various different versions, as I said, of this particular debate, and they give their reasons as to why they think that their version is correct and the opposing concept or the opposing version is incorrect. It's not important for this shiur, but maybe very interesting for another shiur. We'll get into that. And if you want to know more, you're welcome to get in touch with me. By the way, I'm always delighted to receive your emails. I'm not difficult to reach, and I do try and respond to every single email that I receive. I don't always respond right away, but I generally respond within a few days. And my email address is pinidunner, PINIDUNNER, @gmail.com. You're welcome to contact me that way, or via my website, rabbidunner.com, and there's a contact page. You can contact me, and I'm delighted to hear anything that you have to say, comments on the shiurim, on the lectures, on the articles, and you're very welcome to ask me any questions and to consult me on any subject that you think I may be able to be helpful with. I wish I can be helpful in every subject, not always the case, but I will certainly respond, and I look forward to hearing from you. So we've just learnt this section from the Gemara in Chagiga about the debate between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel about whether Shamayim or Eretz were created first. It's a little bit of a puzzling controversy because, as the Nesivos Sholom is going to say, we're going to get to the Nesivos Sholom. Who cares? I mean, what difference does it make? Let's say we would decide we agree with Beit Shammai. Okay, so big deal. Okay, Shamayim came first and then Eretz. Or we're going to say, no, I agree with Beit Hillel. Wonderful. What difference does it make to your life? It makes no difference, or it seemingly makes no difference. If that's your thought, wait till you hear what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said. So we've just commemorated the yard site of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Rabbi Eliezer. Of course, we know that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, and he had to hide in a cave for 12 years. He was escaping from the Romans because he taught Torah, and during this period of time, he was one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva who took the mysticism that Rabbi Akiva knew, and he ran with that ball, and he composed the Zohar, or whatever version of the Zohar that he came up with. And later on, of course, we know that it was only revealed to the public, as it were, much later on in the 14th century. But the basic elements of the Zohar were composed by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and we know that he is buried in Meron. Of course, we've just had the tragic news about the terrible deaths, the 45 deaths in Meron, and it's just been a very, very sad and difficult few days, as we have to consider that on the day that we celebrate Lag BaOmer, we're also going to have to commemorate for all the years ahead of us the terrible deaths of these 45 innocent people who were killed in this terrible stampede that occurred in Meron. So we're going to learn a bit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai today. It's not really Kabbalah, it's not mysticism, it's not esoteric, it's a Medrash Rabbah. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is quoted in the Medrash Rabbah based on this machlokas that we've just seen between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Omar Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, Tomea ani heich nechleku avay sa'olam Beit Shammai Beit Hillel abriya Shammai v'aretz. He says, I'm puzzled. I'm mystified why it is that these great fathers, these patriarchs of the world, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, would argue about which came first, Shamayim or Eretz. Ela shani omer shneim lo nivru ela ki ilfas b'chisuya. He says, because I believe, as far as I'm concerned, that neither of them really, or it sounds like that's what he's saying, neither of them is correct, because they were created together, simultaneously, like a pot and its cover. That's the example that he gives. Ilfas v'chisuya shenemar, and he quotes a pasuk in Yeshaya, Koirani aleim yamdu yachtov, talking about Shamayim v'aretz, and the pasuk says, Yamdu yachtov, they stand together. And the implication, I guess, from this pasuk is, although that's not what the pasuk is talking about, is that they somehow came into being simultaneously, they stand together. Omar Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Shimon. So we know that Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he added to what his father said. He augments it as follows. Im kedas Abba, if you agree with what my father says, Lama pa'amim shu maktim eretz l'shamayim, pa'amim shu maktim shamayim le'eretz. He asks a very good question. Based on what you've just heard from my father, that they were created simultaneously, why is it that on occasion the psukim which talk about shamayim va'aretz say shamayim first and aretz second, or on other occasions say, as we quoted from Perek Beis in Bereshit, say eretz first and shamayim second? Why doesn't it always keep to one order? What is the significance of the difference in the order? And it's to teach you that each one is as valuable as the other. In other words, the psukim want to convey a particular notion. And that is that Shamayim is not superior to Oretz, and Oretz isn't superior to Shamayim. What does that mean? Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Shimon is not really explaining to us what that means. He's just suggesting that the fact that there is a difference between some psukim and others means that they are of equal value, that not one is more valuable than the other. The problem is they're not really telling us what the value of either of them is, that we should know what the value of them combined would be. In other words, what is the value of Shamayim? What is the value of Oretz? What do they represent? That Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Shimon are not talking about, but they are just telling you that they are considered to be equal. And he gives a number of proofs. We're quoting one of them here. This is from the Medrash. The Medrash is quoting Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Shimon. He says that whenever we talk about Abraham, Yitzchak and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, these are the three patriarchs of the Jewish nation, we always start off with Abraham, and we continue with Yitzchak, and then we say Yaakov. Why? Because chronologically Abraham came first, then Yitzchak, and then Yaakov. So that's the way the Pasuk says it. But there is one place, and by the way, this is in Parshat Bechukotai. Here we have the connection to this week's Parsha. In Parshat Bechukotai it says, it's a Pasuk in Vayikra, Perek Chavav, Pasuk Mem Beis, V'zacharti es brisi Yaakov, v'afes brisi Yitzchak, v'afes brisi Avraham ezkair, v'ha'aretz ezkair. I remember my covenant with Jacob, and my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. That's what Hashem says, by the way, in the midst of all the different and quite difficult psukim at the beginning of Bechukotai. God promises to remember his covenant with the patriarchs, but he reverses the chronological order. Instead of putting Abraham first, he puts Yaakov first. And the reason this pasuk exists, says Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Shimon, is to teach you, in the same way Shamayim va'aretz are interchangeable, so too Avraham, Yitzchak and Yaakov, not one of the avos is more valuable, is more precious, is to be considered to be better than any of the others. That's why, at least on this one occasion, this pasuk in the Torah, in Parshat Bechukotai, mentions Yaakov first, Yitzchak, and then Avraham last. Instead of the normal order, the ordinary order is Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Okay, let me just give you a piece of Yefei Toyar. Yefei Toyar is a very interesting parish on the Medrash. Yefei Toyar was written by somebody called Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yitzchak Ashkenazi Yafe. You should know that it's very unusual to find Ashkenazim with the surname Ashkenazi. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, it's Sephardim that had the name Ashkenazi. And the reason for that is because at some point they had ancestors that came from Germany or Poland, and they moved to wherever it was, to Turkey or to Greece. And they became known, they were referenced as Ashkenazi, that's how they were known. And they married, or their children married Sephardim, and they took on all the Sephardim minhagim, and therefore they became Sephardim. But at some point in their ancestry, every single Sephardi who is called Ashkenazi is in fact, has an Ashkenazi ancestor. And at this time, of course, by now, after hundreds of years, they are full-fledged Sephardim, and they've taken on all the different customs and minhagim, etc. of the Sephardim. But you don't find Ashkenazim with that name. Interestingly enough, though, you don't find any Ashkenazim with the last name Sephardi. That's something perhaps we should speak to a name expert about, because I'm sure that there were Sephardim who moved to Europe, to Western Europe or Central Europe, to Germany, to Poland, and why they never took on that last name is interesting, something to think about. But let's see what the Nefei Torah says. He was born in 1525, he died in 1595. He's one of the major commentaries on the Medrash, and he was the Rav of the Ashkenazi Kehillah in Constantinople, that's Istanbul in Turkey, during the 16th century. Omnom, Mizeinoi Muchach Kedas Harav, Bechelik Beis Perek Lamed. So in Moreh Nevuchim, by the way, a fantastic new edition of Moreh Nevuchim, Guide for the Perplexed, has just come out. I think the 3rd volume has just been published. An incredible work of translation, explanation, commentary on Moreh Nevuchim. It's an understudied part of the Rambam's output, but he says here that it doesn't seem to make sense what we've just said about in this machlokas discussing whether or not Shammai came first, or Oretz came first, whatever it is, doesn't make much sense in the context of what we see in the Rambam. But Das Haralbag, and also the Ralbag, who's Gesonides, another very interesting commentary on Tanakh, so the idea is that, let's face it, let's call it by its scientific name, the universe was created in 1 second. Shammai and Oretz didn't come chronologically, that one came first and another one came second. They were all created in an instant. In fact, there was no time before they were created. And at that point in time, they were created. A very interesting observation, because this machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel seems to be indicating that one came first, that at one point in time, Hashem created Shammai, says Beis Shammai, and then at some point later in time, he created Oretz. Says the Nefei Torah, that doesn't make much sense, because if the world was created all in one go, or at least that part of creation which we call Shammai and Oretz was created in one go, how can one have been created first and another one second? Ki yesh mamorim rabim b'divrei Chazal neged deo zu. So, lefi zeh, yesh lefarish ki shneim nivro behemshech zman. So let's try and understand it slightly differently. They were created as time elapsed. Hemshech Zman means there was time was elapsing as they were being created. Mashikosav ka'achas nivro, and that which the Rambam and the Ralbag say they were created in 1 second, which seems to fly in the face of Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. And by the way, we can't have the Rambam and the Ralbag arguing with Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai Beis Hillel seem to agree on one point, which is that there was a chronology, that one was created first and another one was created second. They disagree which one was first and which one was second, but they both agree that there was a first and there was a second. Rambam and Ralbag seem to say that there was no difference in time as to when they were created. So what the Nefei Torah wants to say, to somehow reconcile Rambam and Ralbag with Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, to say that the time elapsed. Let's see what he says. So, Mashe Kosov Ka'achas Nivro. What does it mean then when it says, or when they say, that it was created in a split second? Ratzaloima Sheba'oser Rega Shehischil Brias HaShamayim Hischil Gam Kein Brias HaOretz. That there was a point in time. That's what's so amazing. That's why I took this piece out. It's amazing because it so accords with modern science. It's written by a rabbi in the 16th century. He says, at the point in time when creation occurred, the process began, which for both Shamayim and Oretz. That process happened in a split second. What the Rambam and Ralbag call Ka'achas nivra'u, she'abriya hoisa be'efes zman. In other words, no time actually elapsed at the beginning of creation, and the process began for both Shamayim and Oretz. So, hischil gam kein brias ha'oretz, u'shneim hoyu nimtochim v'hilchim kol echad lefi his yachsusoi shel zeh im zeh. An incredible idea that Shamayim and Oretz both initiated at one point in time, but their creation wasn't fully completed at the same time. So whatever it is that science or physics needed to do in order for it to evolve to become what we would refer to as Shamayim va'aretz took time. Now the question is, which of them completed first? Was it Shamayim or was it Aretz? Now I'm not going to go into the science of it. It would seem to make sense that Shamayim started and then Aretz, actually, the way the first posuk in the Torah goes, right? That Esa Shamayim Esa Aretz, because we know that the first thing that was created was the atmosphere, and only then the world was created, what we consider to be Earth, the physical, material planet that we consider to be Earth. But be that as it may, conceptually, I love the idea that just because something initiated at a particular point in time, even if that was simultaneous with the other, that doesn't mean as they developed that they developed at the same pace. And there seems to be a machlokas between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, which outpaced the other in coming to complete creation. Was it Shamayim or was it Aretz? That's the comment of the Yefei Toyar on this particular machlokas between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Let's now turn to the Nesivos Sholom, and it's not a long piece, but I think you'll enjoy it, and I certainly enjoyed learning it, and I want to share it with you very much. If you're looking for the source sheets, you can find them in the chat section of the Zoom, or you can go to the comment section of the SoundCloud, or you can go to the comment section or the main description section of YouTube, and you can download the source sheets, both everything I've just read until now, which is the Gemara and Chagiga, the Medrash Rabbah and the Yefei Toyar, and also the Nesivos Sholom that I'm about to read, which is essentially just a reproduction to Xerox of the Nesivos Sholom from the Sefer. The Medrash, and he quotes the Medrash, he quotes actually a Medrash, the Medrash I read you was from Bereshis Rabbah. He takes it from Vayikra Rabbah. It's an identical piece of Medrash, and there may be slight nuanced differences, but essentially it's the same passage. Masmich leposuk v'zachartis b'ti Yaakov afis b'ti Yitzchak afis b'ti Avram ezkor v'ha'aretz ezkor. That it mentions this posuk where the chronology of the avos of the forefathers of the patriarchs is reversed, and it juxtaposes that pasuk with the machlokas as machlokas Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai omrim hashamayim nivru tchila v'achar kach haaretz. As we said, Beit Shammai said first Shamayim was created and then Aretz. So Beit Hillel omrim haaretz nivru tchila v'achar kach Shamayim. But Beit Hillel say the opposite view, that first it was Aretz that was created, Eretz, and afterwards it was Shamayim. And then the Medrash says, as we just heard, Omar Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai Tama ni'ech how can they argue about this? It's seemingly a ridiculous, a pointless argument. Because I say that they were created together simultaneously, like a pot and its cover, hainu yachtov, together. There was no difference in time. Don't say Shamayim came first or Aretz came first. Not at all. They both came at the same time. Amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Shimon, and then we have the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai who says, Im kadas Shama Abba, if you're going to agree with my father, he says there's only one place where Eretz comes before Shamayim. Usually it's Shamayim that comes before Eretz. He makes this point that not one of them is greater than the other. They both have equal value, and says the Nesivos Sholom, Umevi Harbe Dugma'is Lakach. He gives many examples. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon brings many examples of things where the orders are reversed in order to demonstrate that they are of equal value. And one of them is this pasuk in Bechukotai, because in every situation, wherever we mention the avos, we mention the three avos, we always say Avraham first. Why? He came first. But here we say Yaakov first. We don't start with Avraham, we start with Yaakov, then Yitzchak, then Avraham. So we see that they are all of them exactly the same as each other. Each one of them is of equal value. Don't say Avraham was greater than Yitzchak because he came first. Not at all. Yitzchak is as great as Avraham, is as great as Yaakov. Yaakov is as great as Avraham. They're all as great as each other. Says the Nesivos Sholom, the Tzorech Biur, we need to really understand. We need to unpack this. We need to understand what's going on here. Machloikas, Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, Bebrias Hashem Yisbarach, Es Hashemayim, Ves Haaretz. This seemingly pointless dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel as to which one was created first, Shamayim or Haaretz. Harei, Mai, Dahava, Hava, says the Nesivos Sholom. That which happened, happened. It happened a long time ago. It's of no relevance to our lives. Why exactly would we even mention this dispute? It's mentioned multiple times. What relevance has it to us, and that we should mention it so regularly across Talmudic and Midrashic literature? It makes no sense to cite this debate because it's of no relevance to us. V'yesh lefarish. So he says as follows. He says we can understand it al dvar ha'avodah. The first way to understand it is based on the fact of our service of God. Tehine. Nechliku achim hakdoshim harav hakodesh Rabbi Elimelech v'harav hakodesh Rabbi Zusha zechusam yogein aleinu. There were two very special brothers at the beginning of the history of Hasidic masters. They were both Talmidim of the Maggid of Mezrich. That means they came, if you're going to put it in these terms, in the third generation of Hasidic leadership. One of them was called Rabbi Elimelech. He became the Rav and Rebbe of Lizhensk, and people still visit his Tzion. It's around Purim time that they go to his Tzion. Rabbi Elimelech of Lizhensk, he brought Hasidus to Poland. He had a brother, Rabbi Zusha of Anipola, who was also a very, very great Hasidic leader, and he was very poor, but highly respected, very highly regarded, and they had this incredible relationship between the two of them, Rabbi Elimelech and Rabbi Zusha, and they once had a difference of opinion. Listen to this difference of opinion, it's fascinating. And they had an argument about what is the best method in the service of God. Im Yehudi tzorech lahaschil b'avodas Hashem Yisbarach migadlus habayre. Is it that a Jewish person who wants to be perfect in the service of God, how should he start? Should his first point of call be that he should consider and reflect upon the greatness of God, of the Creator? The more he will appreciate, or she will appreciate, the greatness, the vastness, the omnipotence of God the Creator, the more he or she will recognize their own inadequacy. In other words, don't focus on your inadequacy first. Focus first on the greatness of God. That's what should be your go-to place. You come in, you say to your rabbi, I want to be a good Jew. What should I do first? Should I do greatness of God first, or should I do my own inadequacy first? So if you would have gone to, I don't know which one it is that said it, if you've gone to one, either Rabbi Elimelech or Rabbi Zusha, would have said to you, focus on the godless habayre first. The other one was of the opinion, or at least was in doubt as to whether his brother was correct, was of the opinion that first place that you should go to is talk about your own inadequacy. Focus on your own inadequacy first. And once you've truly appreciated how inadequate, how powerless you really are, you truly are, you will then come to recognize the greatness of God. It's inevitable that if you focus on Shveilus Atzmai, you're going to come to the concept of Gadlus Habayre. That's the dispute between Rabbi Elimelech and Rabbi Zusha about the service of God. V'nichnasu lishoel es Rabbam HaMagid HaGodol. They went to the Mezrich HaMagid, who was their teacher, their Rebbe, their mentor, the person whose opinion they most respected in such matters, and they went to speak to him about this to resolve their debate. V'hei shiv lohem she'elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. Do you know what he responded to them? You're both right. Don't think that one has an edge over the other. In fact, you're both right. You both got it right. However, Shveilus Atzmai should come first. Even though you're both right, listen, you have to pick one of them. You can't say that, you have this, by the way, about Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. The Gemara says that they needed to decide which of the two schools of thought, when it came to halacha, one should follow. Should you follow Beit Hillel or should you follow Beit Shammai? So they said, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. The decision was that both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are correct in all matters of halacha where they've reached a particular conclusion, where they've come to a particular decision as to what is the correct way to carry out the halacha. However, halacha ka Beis Hillel. The halacha has to be like Beis Hillel, because you always got to go in one direction. You can't have multiple directions, because then there's just confusion, chaos, and it's no good. So the Mezritch Magid said, you're both right. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim, he said to Reb Zisha and to Rabbi Eliezer. However, let's be frank, Shveilus Atzma is the way to go. That's how you're going to start. And in this way, we can really understand this dispute, this debate between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel that we've been talking about regarding Shamayim va'aretz, which was created first. Shammai Omer, Shamayim nibru techila. Beis Shammai says that the heavens were created first. Hainu sheyehudi tzorich lahaschil migadlus habayra. He's saying that his opinion is that the first thing you need to focus on is Shammai, the heavenly spheres. You got to focus on how great God is, the Gadlus Habayra. The Hillel Omer, Eretz Nivreis Tchila. He says, no, the earth, the material was created first. What does that mean? Let's focus first on the material, the physical, your inadequacy, your limitations. That's what you need to focus on first. And that's on that, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, he says, I cannot understand, I'm totally puzzled, I am mystified that they would argue about this matter. Because I believe that Shamayim and Oretz, and in this case, what we're talking about is Gadlus Habayre and Shveilus Atzmai were created simultaneously. They're two sides of the same coin, right? That's what he says. You need both. You can't have one without the other. One cannot exist without the other. In other words, you can't exist. You can't possibly contemplate the greatness of God until you understand that you're not such a great thing yourself. And you can't possibly focus on the fact of how not great you are unless you consider the fact that there's a great entity called God which is greater than anything that could possibly exist. So you need one in order to have the other. I would call this discernment by or via comparison. You can really appreciate something when you can compare it with something else. But if you don't have that other thing to compare it to, it's not possible that one is better than the other, or one is even good. You've got no idea because you're so limited in the way you perceive that thing because you don't have the benefit of the other. So if you want to know whether or not a particular type of, a brand of clothing is good, you've got to be able to compare it with another brand of clothing. Because you can see, well, this one is stitched beautifully, the cloth is much better, it looks much nicer, and therefore now you know that this one, even though maybe the colours are the same, you can see that that one hasn't been fabricated with quite the same quality. You need one in order to have the other. Says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, I don't even know what the argument is about. How is it possible to say Shamayim came first, in other words, let's focus on Shamayim but don't bother with Oretz? Or for Hillel to say that Oretz came first, forget Shamayim, don't waste your time. You can't possibly even reach any valuable judgment with regard to either Shamayim or Oretz without knowing about the other one. And therefore they must have come yachtav, they must have come together. It's not possible to know of your own inadequacies, of your own limitations, until you understand how great and how omnipotent and how wonderful God is. It's not possible to know how great God is until you truly understand your own limitations and the fact that you're not ever going to be able to be even close to even a fraction of what it is that God is. That's how they're going to be, like a pot and a cover. They augment each other. They complement, each other. You need one and you need the other. Without one, the other hasn't quite reached what it needs to get to. It's only when they are together that you have this completeness, this totality. And when one of them is missing, the shleimus isn't there. And he says another answer. The Nesivos Sholom goes ahead and he gives another answer. But I've got another way of explaining this dispute, this debate between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel about which came first, Shammai va'aretz. The koi al sur meirav asei tov. We already mentioned that last week. It's a running theme in the Nesivos Sholom. This concept of sur meirav asei tov, that distance yourself from bad and draw yourself towards good. Shehem Yesodas Avodas Hashem. Those are the fundamental aspects of service of God. Matzinu Bazer Beis Drachim. You've got two ways of fulfilling of this ideal of Sur Meirav Asei Tov. How can you do it? Im Yehudi Tzarech Lahaschel B'Sur Meira LaKoresh Sarah Hatoma B'Kirbay. The first thing is, you could say that the way I want to do it is, I want to make sure I'm totally devoid of any bad, anything negative. I'm getting rid of it. I'm not going to have anything to do with it. And as a result of that, by the vacuum of negativity that you've created, that there will be a positivity that fills that space. By Sur Meira, you're automatically going to be in a space of Va'asei Tov. It's not possible to be an asay tov if you've still got negative aspects in you. So you've got to focus on getting rid of all the bad in order to get to the good. You've got to focus on making sure that I'm not associated with anything that's going to distract me from my avodah, in order to get to that avodah, the positive aspects of it at some point in the future. In other words, people who think I can jump in and be a good person, but still there are aspects of their lives which are not perfect, they are misleading themselves. They're in a situation where they're not doing the right thing, because you've still got things in your life which are just not positive. Therefore, the good that you're doing is tainted by the ra that still exists in your life. That's one method. V'yesh oy derech. But there's another way of Sur Meira Asei Tov. What is it? Hainu Sur Meira al Yodei Asei Tov. You could say the way I'm going to get rid of the bad is if I'm going to be completely and utterly devoted to doing good, I'll never get a chance to do anything bad. All the bad things in my life will just automatically disappear. Why? Sur Meira Asei Tov. I'll have been a doer of good, and therefore the bad will no longer exist. I'll have distanced myself from bad. The way to make sure that you eradicate, that you eliminate bad in your life, is by doing good. The more you do good, the more you're focused on good, the more you're focused on the positive, the more you're focused on helping, on being with Hashem, of devoting your life to godly pursuits, the less chance there is of anything evil getting in the way of your aspiration to be a person that is devoted to God, that has faith in God. Chazal, and this is something that we see in Chazal's Gemara in Kedushin Daf Lamed Omid Beis. Barasi Yetzirah, Barasi Lo Torah Tavlin. We know that God said, "I created the Yetzirah." That's a default position. Every human being has something that distracts them from doing the right thing. It's called the Yetzirah, and there's nothing you can do about it. You're physical, you're material. That's the way your body works. That's the way that's who you are. That's the animal in you. That's going to be your life, and that's something you have to deal with on a daily basis. However, Barasi Yetzirah, Barasi Lo Torah Tavlin. I've created Torah, which is an antidote to the Yetzirah. Somehow, if you devote your life to Torah, even though you're a physical human being, you still have the chance to eradicate, to eliminate the Yetzirah within you. Through the study of Torah, if you do it for the right purpose. By the way, there's people who study Torah who don't do it for the right purpose, and therefore they haven't managed to achieve that sur meira aspect. But if the reason you study Torah is because you know it's a godly pursuit and it's going to improve you as you are in a spiritual sense, you're going to become closer to God. That's why you're learning Torah. I'm not learning Torah because I want to show everybody how fantastic I am in explaining what Reb Chaim Soloveitchik says on the Sugya. That's not a good reason to learn Torah. If you learn Torah because you know that studying Torah is going to improve your neshama, the status of who you are spiritually, then automatically that's going to lead to a sur meira situation. Why? Because you're devoted to Torah for all the right reasons. Even though when you started learning Torah there was a certain amount of ra in you, we know from the Gemara in Kedushin, Barasi, Yetzahara, Barasi Loi, Torah Tavlin, that somehow Torah can undermine, can take away, can eradicate, can cure you from any evil that may lay within you. And with this understanding of the Sur Meirava Asay Tov, we can understand the debate between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about which came first, Shamayim v'Aretz. Shamayim nivru tchila. According to Beis Shammai, Shamayim comes first. Hainu sheYehudi tzarich lahaschil me'onyonim hashamayimim Torah v'avoda. That the first thing you need to focus on is all the aspects of spirituality related to Shamayim, elevated stuff that makes you a holy person. V'Hillel oimer eretz nivreis tchila. Let's be honest, we're all human beings. And to ever imagine that by the study of Torah you're going to be able to eradicate the evil within you, that's just being delusional. You need to be able to focus on the bad aspects within you first in order to achieve the level of Torah that you want to get to. It sounds like Hillel was more of a Musanik and Shammai was more of like a Chosid. But you remember the famous story that Shammai was approached by somebody who wanted to convert. He said, I wanted to convert and become a ger, to become a convert. I want to stand on one foot. Can you teach me everything I need to know? But Shammai chased him out with a stick. Why? Because it sounds like Beis Shammai was somebody who wanted to focus on lofty things. Don't waste your time. Unless you're willing to devote yourself to the lofty pursuit of spiritual ideals, coming to me and saying, I want to learn the Torah on one foot, you're just wasting my time, you're wasting your time. Clear off, go away, I don't want to see you again. But he came to Hillel. Hillel said, well, that sounds interesting. That sounds like something that could be done. You know how you can do it? Never do to your fellow man that which you don't want to have done to yourself. In other words, if you behave in an upright and correct and moral fashion, that's all you need to do. That's the platform for the Torah. The rest is going to follow. First, Sur Meirah, then Asay Toiv. The Nesivos Sholom doesn't say that. I just added that in. It seems to be that Shammai and Hillel had very different approaches to how one can achieve the objectives of being the best possible Jew that you can be. The Hillel Omer Eretz Nivreis Tchila, Eretz comes first. The human nature. We can't escape the human condition. That comes first. The first thing is you need to get rid of the Ra in your life. You've got to purge all the evil in your life. That comes first. All the material desires that you have for material purposes, and the bad attributes, your bad character traits that you have, get rid of them. Let's get rid of them first. What does Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai say? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is clearly somebody who understands the human condition. He had a deep understanding, and he said as follows: Shamayim v'aretz nivru yachtov. You can't have one without the other. To pretend that what Shammai says is good and what Hillel says is no good, or the opposite, that what Hillel says is good and what Shammai says is no good, is to completely misunderstand everything about the human condition. You can't have one without the other. They're, as I said before, two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. It's a simultaneous. It's two tracks that's actually one track that you're doing at the same time. At the same time as you're meant to purge yourself from bad, you're meant to be cleaving and doing everything that's good. You're meant to make sure that you're good, but at the same time that you don't allow bad to interfere with your life and with your life's goals. It's not possible to get rid of bad without doing good. One without the other doesn't work. You can't do good. You can't be a truly good person. You know it. Everybody knows it. You can't be a really good person if there's things in your life which are bad, which you're doing, which are just not right. You know yourself that the human condition is a broad picture. It's a global picture. Who you are is not one facet of who you are. It's everything about who you are. So you've got to work on yourself on every level. I've got to make sure that I am a Sur Meira and an Asay Tov at the same time. I've got to make sure that Shammai and Oretz are simultaneous. That's what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says in this medrash. The only way that you can achieve this objective is if you combine your efforts on both fronts to achieve what you need to achieve in order to be the person that you need to be. Fascinating. He says, and that's why you've got this pasuk in the Torah, and the Medrash cites this pasuk as proof of the fact that you can't do one without the other. You need both in order to achieve the objective. Shemaktim kanes Yaakov. Who comes first in that pasuk? Yaakov. Who was Yaakov? The Nesivos Sholom tells us. In every other place, Avram comes first. Why? Of course he comes first. He's chronologically, he is first. It makes perfect sense. It's to teach you that each one has equal value to the other, but Yaakov comes first. Do you know what? Avraham is midas hachesed. Avraham was the ultimate asay tov. He was kindness personified. He was a person who was so loving and so wonderful to everybody he met. That's Avraham Avinu. That's his thing. He's an asay tov. What's Yitzchak? Yitzchak who midas hayira. Isaac, the patriarch Yitzchak, was the midas hayira, fear, awe of God. What's that? That's sur meira. What's yira? Yira sachet. I'm frightened. I don't want to sin because I'm going to make Hashem upset. That's not so much asay tov. That's another different aspect of the human condition. The reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is because I've got yiras shamayim. It's not because I've got chesed and ahava, it's because I've got yiras shamayim. The reason I'm doing this mitzvah is because I've got yiras shamayim. That's Yitzchak. What was Yaakov? V'Yaakov midas tiferes hakoilel mizigas beis hamidos ke'echad. You've got both of these come into a combination, into a combined form. That's Yaakov Avinu. Without the combination, Yaakov Avinu is the ultimate representation of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Medrash. He's saying it comes together, it's one thing. You can't have two separate things. You can't have just Avraham and no Yitzchak. And you can't have just Yitzchak and no Avraham. You need to have Yaakov, and that's why in that pasuk Yaakov comes first, and why Yaakov is relevant to the machlokas between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, why Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said that you need Shneim Yachtov, you can't have them separately. It doesn't make any sense for this argument to even exist between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. So what is it? Ahava v'yira. You need both love and fear in order to achieve the ultimate objective in terms of the service of Hashem. The completeness, the totality of the human condition is only if you've got two of these like one. Just having Ava or just having Yira is not enough. That's why Yaakov comes first. I remember the covenant I have with Yaakov comes first, not Abraham first, because Yaakov has to be at the leader of the pack when conveying this important message of Sur Meira v'asei tov, that you have to come together. And that's why the Torah put it in this particular order. They're all equal. What? Avram, Yitzchak, and of course Yaakov, that combines the two. They're all equal. They all have to be. Shovin in this context doesn't mean equal. It means they're all in the same pot. They're all part of the same thing. You can't separate one from the other. You can't say I'm going to be a follower of Avraham, but I ignore Yitzchak. You can't say I'm going to be a Yitzchak, but I'm not going to be Avraham. Avraham and Yitzchak come together, And they create the Yaakov, which is a combination of both Ahava and Yira, and it's called Tiferes. Sheshleimus avodas Hashem hirak kasher Yehudi matares kol hamidos. The only way that you can reach the ultimate level of what it is you need to be is if Midas Ahava, Midas Yira, Midas Tiferes, you've got all three, somehow you've reached the zenith of what it is that you need to be. As Meishiv es Hashlemus b'avodas Hashem, Masig es Hashlemus b'avodas Hashem, then you will have reached Shlemus in terms of your service of God, which is of course where you want to be. We'll leave it here for today. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.